On the morning of Monday, June 29th, concern began to mount when Dr. Teresa Severs failed to show up for work. Shortly afterward, a close friend of Teresa's, who was also a professional colleague, grew worried and decided to check in on her. She made her way to Teresa's home, hoping it was simply a misunderstanding or delay. Upon arriving at the Severs residence, everything appeared normal from the outside. The doors were closed, the windows intact. There were no immediate signs of forced entry or disturbance. With a sense of growing unease, the friend used a spare key to enter the house. When she got inside, she called out to Teresa. Then, in the midst of that unsettling quiet, the friend made a devastating discovery. What had started as a routine check-in had turned into the beginning of a horrifying and tragic mystery. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. Teresa Ann Severs was born in Connecticut on November 19, 1968, in a family that valued hard work, ambition, and the pursuit of knowledge. Friends from her childhood recall that she always had a keen interest in science and a genuine empathy for those around her, qualities that foreshadowed her destiny in the medical field. Throughout her high school years, Teresa balanced academic pursuits with a love for community service, consistently volunteering at local shelters and neighborhood improvement projects. She carried this philosophy to medical school and beyond, vowing to practice medicine in a way that emphasized empathy and holistic treatment approaches. After completing her education, Teresa ventured into various roles that allowed her to refine her focus on integrative health. She was known to research cutting-edge therapies and discuss the role of lifestyle changes in preventing long-term illnesses. It wasn't just that she had an impressive set of academic credentials. It was her evident compassion, warmth, and ability to set patients at ease that truly propelled her forward. When Dr. Teresa relocated to Florida, she recognized that the warm climate, vibrant communities, and the region's rising population of retirees provided a unique opportunity for a doctor who was eager to experiment with innovative healing protocols. Over time, her office became known for its bright atmosphere and its dedicated staff, all drawn together by Teresa's unwavering enthusiasm for improving her patients' quality of life. She often worked late into the evening, refusing to turn away anyone who needed guidance or reassurance, and encouraging her staff to maintain the same attitude of compassionate care. On a personal level, Teresa's closest friends noted that she was an energetic multitasker who always seemed to juggle several demanding roles simultaneously. She was a mother who relished the simple moments, driving her children to dance classes, helping them with homework assignments, or cheering them on at sporting events, while also wearing the hat of a forward-thinking physician, an entrepreneur, and a public speaker at community events. Teresa's marriage to Mark Severs added a distinct dimension to her journey. Mark, who appeared outwardly to support Teresa's practice and her aspirations, was often seen accompanying her to local fundraisers or wellness seminars. To casual observers, their relationship looked like a balanced partnership. Teresa was the driven visionary, and Mark handled many logistical or behind-the-scenes tasks that helped her practice grow. Though Mark was not formally in the medical field, he played a role in the business aspects of the clinic, sometimes assisting with administrative tasks or exploring potential opportunities to broaden her patient base. Friends of the couple recall that they displayed a comfortable dynamic, finishing each other's sentences on some occasions, and finding ways to manage the day-to-day chaos of raising a family while running a thriving practice. At the time, there was little reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. No apparent signs of discord that would raise alarm among those closest to them. Yet, as with many successful professionals, Teresa grappled with the demands of running a busy medical practice alongside the rigors of family life. Reports from friends indicated that she sometimes felt overwhelmed by her growing patient base, the financial investments needed to keep her operation at the cutting edge, and the inevitable stressors that come with parenting. Still, her passion never appeared to wane. Rather, these challenges seemed to fuel her desire to break new ground. She dreamed of opening additional clinics or partnering with other healthcare specialists to develop a network of integrative medicine resources across Florida and beyond. Those around her often remarked that Teresa was on the verge of something even bigger, especially as she began planning workshops, retreats, and expanded services that might eventually reach a national audience. Beyond the boundaries of her professional life, Teresa was also deeply invested in her community. She engaged with local charities, initiated donation drives, and regularly participated in events aimed at supporting underprivileged families. For Teresa, giving back was not an obligation, but a privilege, an extension of the same principles that guided her medical practice. Over time, she became something of a local figure, respected not just for her medical innovations, but also for her willingness to shoulder the burdens of those who struggled. Patients trusted her, and community members leaned on her for both physical treatment and emotional encouragement. It was against this backdrop of apparent harmony and growing success that a subtle tension began to form, though almost no one in Bonita Springs recognized it at the time. Life, as it often does, became more complex behind closed doors. Whether that complexity stemmed from financial pressures, personal disagreements, or hidden aspects of individual personalities, it remained largely invisible to the outside world. On the surface, Teresa's career was flourishing, and her family's life seemed poised to continue on a bright path. She frequently mentioned new projects in the works, discussing cutting-edge treatments or collaborations that would elevate her practice to the next level. In casual conversation, she seemed optimistic about her future and confident in her ability to balance all her responsibilities. She was still the go-to doctor, the vibrant neighbor, and a mother who took pride in the achievements of her children. Little did anyone suspect how soon the public's perception would be shattered, replaced by a sense of deep tragedy and countless unanswered questions. On Sunday, June 28th, the summer sun in Bonita Springs seemed to shine a little brighter than usual, casting its warm glow over manicured lawns and busy local shops. In many ways, this day was supposed to be routine for Dr. Teresa Severs, too. She had recently returned from a brief trip up north, where part of her extended family still resided. Because of overlapping work schedules, the plan had been for her husband and 2 young daughters to stay behind for a few extra days, enjoying time with relatives, while Teresa got back to her busy medical practice. She had set foot in Florida late on Sunday, confident that her empty house would offer a peaceful transition from travel fatigue to the responsibilities awaiting her at her clinic the next morning. When Teresa walked into her comfortable, well-kept home, there must have been a moment of relief. Despite her tireless energy, she was only human, and an empty house can sometimes be the perfect environment for a brief moment of calm. At some point, she set down her luggage, perhaps checked for any mail that had piled up, and reviewed her schedule for the coming week. But as the warm Florida evening surrendered to the deeper hush of night, something indescribably dark, something no one who knew her would ever have imagined, manifested within those walls. By the time the sun rose the next day, Dr. Teresa Severs' home had shifted from a sanctuary of family life to a place of incomprehensible tragedy. On Monday morning, June 29, concern began to bubble when Teresa failed to appear at her medical practice. Ordinarily, she was the first to arrive, unlocking the office, reviewing patient notes, and delegating tasks to her dedicated staff. Colleagues described her as someone who never missed a day of work without notifying the team in advance. Patients who were scheduled for early appointments found themselves waiting in a quiet lobby, exchanging puzzled glances. Some assumed there had been a scheduling error. Others speculated that Dr. Teresa might have been delayed by flight issues or unexpected traffic. Yet as minutes turned into an hour, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. The clinic staff attempted to reach Teresa by phone, expecting to hear at least a quick message or an apology for being late. No calls were returned. This was deeply uncharacteristic of a physician known for her meticulous planning and her unwavering commitment to every individual on her patient roster. Shortly thereafter, one of Teresa's close friends, who also happened to be a colleague, opted to check on her at home. The initial drive to Teresa's house was made in a spirit of concern more than alarm. Maybe she had overslept, the friend reasoned, or perhaps she was feeling unwell after the trip. That brief drive, weaving through Bonita Springs' peaceful residential areas, would ultimately deliver one of the most jarring experiences this person would ever face. Upon arrival at the Severs residence, Everything was clear from the outside. No broken windows, no open doors, no immediate signs of what had happened. The front yard, as well kept as ever, offered no clue about the horror that lay inside. And yet, the friend found the house uncharacteristically quiet, with blinds half drawn, giving the impression of an eerily still environment. With a mix of trepidation and determination, the friend used a spare key, or possibly retrieved one from a hidden spot Teresa had often relied upon, to let herself inside. Instantly, an unsettling hush engulfed her. She called out for Teresa, expecting an apologetic response, but no answer came. It is difficult to encapsulate the exact blend of dread and disbelief that must have coursed through that friend's mind as she made her way through the entryway. At that point, the concerned colleague spotted signs of a disturbance. Though the house was not ransacked in the way one might expect from a typical break-in, details seemed slightly off, forming an overall impression that something had gone very wrong. Finally, she discovered Teresa's lifeless body. The specifics of that moment would haunt her for the rest of her life. Perhaps the most terrifying realization was that such a horrific event had taken place in an environment that appeared mostly intact. There was no shattered glass from forced entry, no rummaging indicative of a typical robbery. It made the scene feel chillingly personal, as though someone who knew the house. Trying to maintain some measure of composure, the friend called 911, her voice trembling with shock and disbelief. Within minutes, law enforcement descended upon the residence. They arrived to a tragic tableau. A successful physician, a beloved neighbor, now the victim of a suspicious death that warranted an immediate and thorough investigation. As deputies from the Lee County Sheriff's Office began canvassing the crime scene, they meticulously documented every inch of the house, photographing, collecting samples, and searching for the slightest clue that might point toward a suspect or reveal a motive. Almost immediately, Teresa's network of friends, colleagues, and neighbors caught wind of the tragedy. By midday, hushed conversations, text messages, and phone calls were circulating. "Have you heard?" one neighbor asked another. "Something has happened at Teresa Severs' house." The local rumor mill, typically filled with idle chatter about weekend plans or upcoming homeowners association meetings, transformed overnight. According to acquaintances, Mark's voice trembled as he tried to make sense of the news. His wife, the woman who tirelessly worked to better the lives of her patients, was suddenly gone under circumstances too horrifying to comprehend. Within hours, Mark would be on an urgent flight back to Florida to face a scene none of them could have anticipated. The arrival of local news outlets at the scene further amplified the tension. Microphones and cameras appeared along the street, capturing images of the crime scene tape fluttering in the breeze and the somber faces of law enforcement officials who refrained from commenting on any specifics. The formal announcements offered scant details. An active investigation was underway, foul play was suspected, and the sheriff's office was asking for patience while their team collected facts. Yet for a town so unaccustomed to such chilling events, the thirst for more information became palpable. Rumors began swirling, from wild theories about a random break-in to whispered speculation of a professional grudge. Every new piece of information, or even unverified hearsay, seemed to spread in an instant, intensifying a community-wide sense of fear and vulnerability. In the immediate aftermath of Dr. Teresa Severs' shocking death, law enforcement officials in Lee County found themselves grappling with a bewildering puzzle. By all initial accounts, Teresa had no known enemies, no open disputes that might explain such a violent act. Yet the brutality of the crime, coupled with the unusual lack of ransacking in her home, strongly suggested that the act had been deliberate, perhaps even planned in advance. Investigators realized they would need to dissect every facet of Teresa's life if they hoped to uncover a clue that would lead to a meaningful suspect. That painstaking effort would require sifting through financial records, analyzing digital footprints, and conducting interviews with anyone who might have had access to Teresa or knowledge of her routines. It was a daunting endeavor, and the magnitude of the task became clear as soon as detectives started mapping out Teresa's final 48 hours. They interviewed flight attendants, cab drivers, and anyone else who might have come into contact with her during her return from Connecticut. They examined phone records to see if her calls or text messages in that time frame hinted at any escalating conflict. They spoke with neighbors who had observed her arrival home, though most reported seeing little more than Teresa pulling into her driveway around sunset. At first, these lines of inquiry turned up few leads. No neighbor had noticed an unusual vehicle parked on her street, and no security camera captured a suspicious figure lurking around her property. If there was a killer in the vicinity, he or she had moved with unsettling stealth. Even so, the investigators' instincts told them that the killer was no random interloper. The initial crime scene assessment had uncovered subtle indicators that a premeditated plan might be at play. For example, certain doors showed no evidence of forced entry, and a few cameras from nearby businesses suggested that traffic on Teresa Street had been remarkably quiet that night. That sense of calculation set detectives on a path of deeper scrutiny. They began the laborious process of reconstructing Teresa's personal and professional life. Every appointment, every phone call, every personal relationship. As the investigators dug, they discovered a telling detail that ultimately became a catalyst for the entire inquiry. Teresa Severs had a robust digital presence. She used emails and text messages to stay in constant communication with her clinic staff and sometimes even with her patients who had urgent questions. Additionally, she managed her schedule electronically and kept notes on various upcoming business opportunities. With warrants in hand, they seized Teresa's home computer, her work laptop, and any mobile devices she had used. Forensic analysts combed through thousands of messages, cross-referencing names, dates, and subject lines in a quest for any sign of friction or threat. Soon, however, a new line of inquiry emerged from a surprising source: digital footprints tied to cell phone records from out of state. A detective assigned to review phone data was struck by unusual communications around the time of Teresa's murder. These communications originated from numbers not local to Florida. They seemed to trace back to individuals in Missouri. Yet after examining the logs more closely, he noticed calls and text messages that spiked in frequency leading up to the end of June. Even more telling were the location pings of these phones in the days around Teresa's murder. Though the owner of the phone was purportedly in Missouri, the data indicated that the device was traveling south, passing through multiple states, and ultimately winding up in Florida around the critical time window. Pursuing this lead, investigators made contact with law enforcement agencies in Missouri, sharing details about the case and asking for assistance in identifying the individuals behind those suspicious phone numbers. Their counterparts cross-checked local databases and discovered names that triggered deeper scrutiny. Wayne Wright, often referred to simply as Wayne, and Jimmy Ray Rogers. The next step involved determining whether these men had a legitimate reason to be in Florida, let alone in Bonita Springs near Teresa Severs' home. As investigators dug deeper, they learned that Wayne Wright had a connection to Mark Severs, which in itself was not necessarily incriminating. How likely was it that a friend from out of state happened to be in town, unbeknownst to anyone, at the exact moment a heinous crime took place? Adding to the intrigue were phone records showing that Wright and Rogers seemed to be traveling together. Their devices, at least as reflected in cell tower pings, moved in tandem southward, lingered in Florida, and then headed back north. Investigators hypothesized that if they had come to Florida for a harmless visit, they likely would have been more open about their arrival or made contact with known acquaintances. Yet to the best of anyone's knowledge, Wayne Wright's name did not surface in the immediate circle of Florida residents interviewed after Teresa's murder, beyond the mention that he was an old friend of Mark. This incongruity, paired with the suspicious timing and the patterns in phone usage, fueled a sense that these two men might be far more than casual visitors. Nevertheless, the investigators needed more than pings on a map to secure an arrest. Cell phone records alone might not convince a court that these individuals had anything to do with Teresa's death. So, they redoubled their efforts. Law enforcement in both Florida and Missouri stepped up their game, digging through digital footprints, examining financial records, and identifying any acquaintances who might have seen or interacted with Wright and Rogers during their travels. The leads began to multiply. A clerk at a convenience store in rural Missouri recalled that a pair of men, fitting approximate descriptions, had purchased snacks and fuel shortly before heading south. Security camera footage from highways and rest stops eventually confirmed that the men's car was moving toward Florida. Then, camera logs from selected Florida highways placed them in the southern part of the state, suspiciously close to Bonita Springs, at a time that matched up with the window of Teresa's murder. As word of these investigative breakthroughs circulated among law enforcement, so too did the determination to bring the suspects in for questioning. The challenge lay in figuring out where they were. Rogers was known to drift between jobs, while Wright had a somewhat more stationary life. But he too had grown elusive since news of Teresa's murder reached the public domain. Detectives worried that if the men realized the police were onto them, they might destroy potential evidence, vanish entirely, or attempt to construct alibis. Careful coordination between agencies was crucial. Behind the scenes, forensic teams pushed forward with analyzing every thread of evidence retrieved from Teresa's home. One item that garnered special attention was the kitchen flooring and the area around it, where technicians used specialized chemicals to detect latent footprints or shoe impressions invisible to the naked eye. Another area of focus was the front door and any secondary access points. Had someone unlocked a side door or used a security code to disarm a system? If so, how might they have acquired that code? Another question lingered. Were there phone calls placed or messages sent from Teresa's own devices in the final hours of her life that might have signaled fear or recognized a visitor at the door? The deeper investigators delved, the more they were convinced this was not a spontaneous act. The killer, or killers, had orchestrated events to ensure Teresa would be alone and unsuspecting. Eventually, the convergence of digital proof and real-world observations reached a tipping point. Authorities in Missouri pinpointed the whereabouts of both Curtis Wayne Wright and Jimmy Ray Rogers. Rather than risking a dramatic confrontation, law enforcement planned a meticulous approach to bringing them in, hoping to secure arrests simultaneously so neither suspect had time to warn the other or flee. Surveillance teams kept tabs on the men, noting their movements to ascertain the safest and most strategic window for apprehension. Within days, deputies swooped in a separate location to execute arrests. Wright and Rogers were taken into custody. After arresting Curtis Wayne Wright and Jimmy Ray Rogers in connection with Dr. Teresa Severs' murder, law enforcement in Florida and Missouri found themselves standing at the threshold of a far more complex puzzle. From the outset, investigators had acknowledged the possibility that these men might not have acted on their own. Traveling such a great distance to commit a murder in a seemingly random Florida home was peculiar at best and suspicious in the extreme. As the authorities dug deeper, multiple strands of evidence began to converge on a theory that stunned many in the community. Mark Severs, Teresa's husband, might have all orchestrated. The official shift from viewing Mark as a grieving spouse to a potential suspect was no abrupt pivot. Rather, it arose from a methodical and painstaking accumulation of facts that, one by one, pointed to an unsettling explanation for how the murder had come to pass. Detectives started with the obvious: motive. For instance, Mark had appeared cooperative yet oddly calm during his earliest police interviews. This, in itself, is not definitive proof of wrongdoing. People process grief in different ways. But investigators noticed inconsistencies in his account of finances, marital harmony, and future plans. To gain clarity, they scrutinized the Severs family's financial situation. That probe brought to light a vital piece of information. Teresa Severs had a sizable life insurance policy. In fact, she had multiple policies that collectively were worth a substantial sum. Enough, in theory, to draw the attention of investigators looking for potential financial motives. One of the first breakthroughs came from analyzing phone records and text messages linking Mark Severs with Curtis Wayne Wright. While Mark had not hidden his friendship with Wright, claiming they had been close for years, the specific tenor of their communications became a point of contention. In the months leading up to Teresa's murder, the frequency of calls and text messages between the two men had increased notably. Some messages were innocuous, casual chatter about day-to-day life and old memories they shared. Others, though less direct, contained cryptic references that investigators believed might be code or carefully worded phrases pointing to a darker agenda. When Mark was asked to explain the contents of these communications, he attributed them to typical banter, occasionally mixing in the claim that Wright was helping with certain business matters. Meanwhile, newly discovered evidence also hinted at undercurrents of marital tension. Several of Teresa's close confidants revealed that the couple's relationship, while outwardly stable, had endured a series of strains, financial disagreements. She had mentioned wanting to expand her practice, possibly open additional locations, and invest in specialized equipment. Mark, on the other hand, had grown increasingly concerned about the family's financial stability. Against this background, law enforcement returned to the confessions, or lack thereof, by Wright and Rogers. Publicly, the two men continued to deny direct involvement or maintained versions of events that contradicted each other. Underneath that surface, however, prosecutors hoped that pressure and the looming threat of severe punishment might compel at least one suspect to strike a deal. It was a standard strategy in major homicide cases. If you suspect a conspiracy, one party might be induced to testify against the others in exchange for a more lenient sentence. Detectives arranged repeated interviews with Wright, sensing that his link to Mark Severs ran deeper than Rogers did. They questioned him about timelines, phone records, and the suspicious journey from Missouri to Florida. For a time, Wayne Wright offered only half answers, disclaimers, or carefully curated statements that skirted the truth. The turning point arose when a plea agreement became a real possibility. The state's prosecutorial team, determined to hold everyone involved accountable, approached Curtis Wayne Wright with a proposition: reveal the entire truth and testify in court in exchange for a second-degree murder charge or some measure of leniency. After lengthy and complex negotiations, Wayne Wright took a plea deal, admitted guilt to second-degree murder, and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Once the agreement was in place, Wright's story unfurled in jaw-dropping detail. According to Wright's account, the plan began forming months before Teresa's murder. Mark, frustrated by a variety of personal and financial pressures, allegedly confided in Wright about his marital woes, hinting that divorce was impossible or undesirable for personal reasons. Over numerous phone calls and text messages, Mark is said to have tested the waters. He lamented that if something ever happened to Teresa, the life insurance payouts would rescue him from financial calamity and spare him from further marital discord. At first, Wright claimed he had tried to dissuade Mark from such a dark line of thought, but eventually, the conversation turned more concrete. Discussions about timing, method, and how to ensure that Teresa was alone. Wright further alleged that Mark was adamant the murder appears as a random burglary or a crime of opportunity, an act that would draw minimal suspicion toward him. Wright, in turn, recruited Jimmy Rogers. The two men then meticulously planned their trip from Missouri to Florida. Investigators, armed with Wright's statements, now had a narrative in which Mark Severs emerged not merely as a possible suspect, but as the alleged ringleader. Yet they were mindful that a confession from a co-defendant, especially one who benefits from a plea deal, by itself can be insufficient to secure conviction. Someone in Wright's position might lie or exaggerate to shift blame, lessen his own culpability, or secure the best possible plea bargain. Therefore, the task before investigators became verifying that the details of Wright's confession matched independent evidence. They meticulously cross-referenced phone records, flight itineraries, surveillance footage, text messages, financial statements, and the testimonies of others. The deeper they dug, the more certain parallels emerged. The times that Mark and Wright spoke aligned disturbingly well with key events leading up to and immediately after Teresa's murder. Credit card receipts from Missouri to Florida also corroborated part of Wright's story. A separate dimension of the case involved Mark Severs' behavior once Teresa's murder had become national news. Investigators noted that he made numerous calls to insurance companies shortly after his wife's death, inquiring about claim payouts and the required paperwork. As the case against Mark solidified, detectives contemplated the best moment to make an arrest. They had to move carefully. The last thing they wanted was to tip Mark off or give him an opportunity to flee or destroy evidence. Finally, once Wayne Wright's testimony had been thoroughly documented and cross-referenced, and as ballistic, forensic, and digital data corroborated substantial elements of his confession, investigators felt they had enough to make their move. Local authorities coordinated with their Missouri counterparts, but the main target was now in Florida. Mark Severs himself. In the morning, members of the Lee County Sheriff's Office and other specialized units quietly positioned themselves around Mark's residence, ensuring that if he tried to escape, he would be quickly taken into custody. Then, with arrest warrant in hand, they knocked on his door. The official charge read first-degree murder, along with conspiracy to commit murder, highlighting the planned and intentional nature of the crime. Prosecutors moved swiftly to craft their arguments, referencing the life insurance policies, the phone logs, the suspicious timing of Mark's communications with Wright and Rogers, and the newly minted testimonial from Wayne Wright. Mark, on the advice of legal counsel, maintained his innocence, insisting that he had been the victim of misguided accusations. As Mark awaited trial, public sentiment vacillates between shock, anger, and a small contingent of skeptics who still couldn't accept the notion that the husband was behind it all. The trial of Mark Severs and his alleged co-conspirators soon developed into a monumental legal drama that captured Florida's attention and drew national media interest. Jimmy Ray Rogers' trial was up first in a packed courtroom under tight security. After lengthy deliberations, the jury returned a guilty verdict. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. With Rogers now convicted, public attention pivoted squarely to Mark Severs, the figure at the heart of an alleged conspiracy. The main pillar of the state's case rested on testimony from Wayne Wright, who had pled guilty to second-degree murder under a deal guaranteeing a reduced sentence in exchange for honest, comprehensive disclosure of the plot's every detail. The jury, having already seen one conviction for a participant in the murder, was primed to view Mark's entanglement with deep suspicion. After multiple weeks of arguments, witness testimonies, and forensic exposés, both sides presented their closing statements. Prosecutors urged the jury to consider the totality of evidence, reminding them that a case need not contain a dramatic confession recorded on tape to be conclusive. Ultimately, it took the jury substantial deliberation before they returned to the courtroom, faces somber, with a verdict in hand. The judge read the decision. Mark Severs was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. When the bailiffs led Mark away, cameras captured a man who, moments earlier, had been an ordinary Floridian husband, now condemned as a murderer. In the weeks and months that followed, he would seek appeal, but the immediate legal endpoint was clear. Mark Severs was sentenced to death.